So the assumptions I want to start with for this panel discussion is that indoor agricultural facilities will use a lot of power based on sole source lighting as our main strategy. So we're going to talk a little bit about how business models and different growing systems are going to revolve around that assumption. Then we're going to also keep in mind that crops being grown currently have limitations in terms of what price points we can hit. So as we look at how we're going to utilize energy and utilities, light, HVAC, we do have limitations. We can't use as much as we want to, whenever we want to, because we may not be able to afford to sell what we're growing. And then finally, there's a lot of talk when we're dealing with indoor agriculture about extremely niche crops. But there is also a lot of different indoor ag food producing projects that are out there, and those niche markets will be quickly saturated, and we need to think about what we're going to be able to do in terms of accessing a broader market. So I want you to keep those assumptions in mind as we go through the panel discussion. And with that, I'm going to start by letting each panel member introduce themselves and give a short presentation on their company and their background. Okay? We're going to start with Sam from AeroFrams.
My name is Sam Schatz. I'm Managing Director at AeroFrams. So basically, AeroFrams, we're controlled environment agriculture. We've been operating now a vertical farm in Newark for the last 3.5 years, a commercial farm. The company was originally founded in 2004, actually, out of the Cornell School of Agriculture, and we were an OEM for much of the 2000s, and then we reformed the company in 2011 around owning and operating these farms. We built our kind of first Model 3 farm back in 2013 and built many subsequent farms since then, all in Newark. As I mentioned, we've been operating the large-scale production facility now for about 3 years. The design for that facility is about 5 years old. We're in the process right now of closing on the funding of our next project, which will be in Virginia, which will be the next iteration of the design. We're very excited about that. We have been selling to retailers like Whole Foods and ShopRite and Fresh Direct. And we've also brought in financing from many different institutional types of investors, but just to summarize, we've managed to bring in about $200 million of equity capital over about 4 rounds of funding over the last 6 years or so. So I guess we can go, what I'll do is I'll talk next about the technology, which at a very high level here. So we've built in a number of different spaces. I like to show this video because if a picture can speak 1,000 words, a video can do much more than that. I only have another minute here, I think. But basically, this was one of the first farms that we built. It's 3 towers. This was actually an old paintball laser tag facility that we converted to growing food. And we actually operated this. And then this was the next farm we built after that. This is one that we're actually still operating. This is also in Newark. And now these towers are about 36 feet high, and they're growing food year-round using 95% less water than field-grown crops, about 50% less fertilizer, and a small fraction of the land, and 0 pesticides. So the product that we grow doesn't need to be washed. It can go right into the package, which obviously skips a very big step because you don't need to wash it, you don't need to dry it. It goes right into the package, and it can be sold to customers, and we're selling throughout the Northeast, about 8 different SKUs. As you can see here, we're growing using LEDs, latest in LED technology. Everything that you see here, AeroFrams is vertically integrated, so we designed, engineered, manufactured, installed, and then we operate these farms and continuously improve on not just the engineering components, but also on the growing algorithms that we use, nutrient delivery, and all of the kind of supporting systems and harvesting, packaging, seeding, germination, et cetera. So anyway, wanted to share that. Obviously, a lot of great things to discuss on this panel. I will say that the leafy green part of our business is just one part of our business, and we're vertically integrated to go into many different crops. And so we're actively pursuing many crops in addition to what these systems are engineered for. So thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Djavid Abraham. I'm a lead systems designer at Agritecture Consulting. Agritecture is a tech-agnostic, New York-based agriculture consulting company. We focus in controlled environment agriculture, and we consult mostly on greenhouses and vertical farms. So we're not married to one system type or the other. We look at each client's needs based on the particular market that they're operating in and the crop that they want to grow, and we help them to plan their business for profitability and for long-term success. We approach each project with a triple bottom line perspective, looking at the social benefits of their business, the economic benefits, as well as the environmental benefits. So there's really a lot that goes into planning a controlled environment farm. You have to look at market pricing, you have to look at equipment availability, the crop you're growing, and then design around those parameters rather than the other way around. We see a lot of companies and individuals trying to basically force systems in places where they don't necessarily work, or trying to produce crops in them that don't produce a positive return on investment in that particular market. And then that's basically setting yourself up for failure. So we try and steer our clients away from that fate, essentially. And we have had the opportunity to work on over 100 projects in 20 different countries in the past 4 years. And these services range from everything from market research to farm design, feasibility studies, as well as novel system due diligence and investigations into system efficacy. There are really a lot of factors that drive whether a client will choose to go with one CEA system or another. And as you can see on that slide, there's quite a few factors that we look at when we look at the way these systems operate in these particular regions. Water scarcity is a big driver these days, and we hear a lot about water use and efficiency in these farms. And the difference between an evaporatively cooled greenhouse and a completely enclosed vertical farm. A lot of that difference comes to the water use of those particular systems. So in California, for example, you would lose more water through an evaporatively cooled greenhouse than you would through a completely enclosed vertical farm. And if water is really your pain point in your operation, then we would look at how you can manage those specific resources based on the strains in your particular region. We are an interdisciplinary group. We are a healthy mix of agronomists, engineers, policy experts, and sustainability experts. And as I said before, we look at each client's individual needs, and we assess those with a triple bottom line approach and keeping sustainability in mind.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Grant Vandenbush. Despite the very long last name and 3 consonants, I am not Dutch. I do have a Belgian heritage, so I guess it was meant for me to come into this industry. So before I briefly touch on who I am and who we are at Fifth Season, my role is Chief Category Officer, and in the spirit of the conference set by Derek, I just wanted to very, very briefly set on my personal reason why we decided, and I decided to come to this conference. I think as we think about energy usage for food production, specifically for leafy greens and indoor environments, as we all do up here, this is a really high cost driver for us. So figuring this out is a strategic competitive advantage, but when you look at the mission of a lot of our companies, it's also one that's sustainability oriented and it's one with a higher purpose. So it can be a difficult conversation to have when you think about the importance of being able to be competitive on your energy usage. And it's not something that I think I have the answers to, or maybe even we all up here on the stage have the answers to, but I think coming together with this very diverse group is how we can find the solution for how to have the conversation to share best practices. So that's why I'm here. My role at Fifth Season as Chief Category Officer is really to lead corporate strategy, marketing, sales, business development, and broad line how we think about our overall go-to-market strategy. So we grow leafy greens and herbs indoors in robotic vertical farms. We have human-free grow rooms that are connected to a highly automated production process that operates much closer to a smart manufacturing system than it actually does a traditional farm. Chris asked me to come on here and talk about crop types and the purpose for some of the crop types. This map here that you see, I'm sure you all have probably seen it before. The reason why I chose to continue to use it is because it's still the driving factor for why our businesses are able to be successful. The fact that 86% of consumers are consuming leafy greens that are not from the state or even a locality from where they're consuming them is just forcing consumers to settle for an experience that, quite honestly, is not matching their beliefs when they walk up to that category. So over the past couple of years, as you think about the wellness trend starting to infiltrate just about every single decision of people's lives, retailers as well as consumers are looking at the leafy green category with a new lens. And so there's a lot of demand driving leafy greens and herbs broadly. It's not just from that kind of very focused group. So a lot of us do grow it for that as one of the reasons amongst many others. I think one of the other things I wanted to quickly mention is that when Chris set the assumptions for this conversation, I think one of them is really important to come back on, which is the consumer can't pay $100 per ounce for leafy greens. It's just not going to happen. So many of us here do have to face the reality of a math problem that most farms have struggled with for hundreds of years. And so thinking through everything from production to output to grow science and how everything comes together into a system that allows you to justify the high capital expenditure for a lot of these facilities is exactly what a lot of us deal with when we think about just trying to compete on shelf with $2 a pound, big leaf flat cooking spinach. Yeah, that's it.
All right. Well, with that, I've got some prepared questions for the group so we can kind of get the conversation started. What I want to do is start with Djavid, and since their company is more focused on helping growers find ways to implement systems, what I want to do is ask you the question, what type of growing systems have you seen most people looking towards, and kind of give us an idea of why and how they determine the energy impact with those systems?
So to answer your first question, I would say it depends on the scale of investment or funding that they've received so far and kind of what stage at development they are. A lot of kind of categorized as beginners or people who are just entering this industry for the first time are often looking at smaller pilot systems. So container farm systems are very popular for that group. But then there's a constituency of investors out there who are raising higher amounts of capital and looking to implement novel, larger systems that would go into a warehouse envelope. So, these are companies like AeroFrams and Plenty, Bowery, companies of that sort. So, I would say it's a good mix between the two, and there's almost always an immediate interest in going for a vertical farm envelope. And we always stress that our clients should also assess the efficacy of going with a greenhouse for that particular region. And we help them in kind of comparing those two systems as far as energy use, yield output, cost of implementation, as well as long-term operational costs. So there are some regions in which vertical farms will work well consistently year-round, and then others where greenhouses can produce a bit more cheaply. It may be a bit further from the metropolitan area, but you're still within local range. And I'm sorry, what was your second question?
Well, let's take that and develop that answer a
Sure.
little bit further. Let's say if you look at clients that you've had and compare small growers to large growers, and let's make the assumption that they do want to go to indoor farming. What sort of limitations do they have in even choosing equipment for their project? And let's focus on the small grower.
Sure. Yeah. So the limitations are often capital. These systems aren't cheap. It's not inexpensive to put LEDs over every square foot of bed space that you have and to run those LEDs every day. So I would say it's a lot of capital limitations more than anything. And then there are some knowledge gaps as well that we help fill as far as, what are the production parameters for those particular crops? How do you package them? How do you maintain consistency day to day in your output, as well as how do you comply with a lot of the regulations there are out there in bringing that product to market?
So one more question for you on that is when I was listening to one of the panel discussions yesterday, and they were given an example of how a farm has gone through a lot of different generations of HVAC equipment. My experience has been that a lot of the small farms inherit their HVAC equipment. If you're in your experience, if you are inheriting an HVAC equipment, how does that play into the choices that you might have?
Sure, that's a really good question. We have seen a lot of inherited equipment in general. HVAC, also inherited hydroponic systems, inherited irrigation systems, et cetera. But when it comes to HVAC, when it's inherited, it's probably not sized correctly. And when it's not sized correctly, you're either you have too large of a system that'll kick on and off too frequently and lower the lifetime of the equipment, or it doesn't have properly sized dehumidification. And we find in general dehumidification is often overlooked when it comes to completely enclosed systems like vertical farms. And humidity is one of the biggest challenges that we face. When you have crops growing in a box, they're constantly transpiring, and you have to keep those humidity loads down in order to keep vapor pressure deficit in range and to maintain consistent growth. So it's a challenge, and usually when equipment is inherited, you're not sizing correctly or not using basically the right stuff.
So the next question would be for Grant. So Grant, first, in your overview, you didn't tell everybody how big your farm was. So first thing I want to do is set it up with you tell everybody like how large the farm is that Fifth Season is getting prepared to open. Then next, how you guys determined what equipment you were going to be using and what priority you put to making those determinations as you designed your farm.
Yeah, certainly. Thanks for asking me to do that, Chris. So I have a better model on a slide in a panel that I'm on in about 30 minutes, so hopefully y'all don't get too sick of me until then. The farm that we just finished is 60,000 square feet. It's in Pittsburgh. It's in a historic town called Braddock. It's actually the town with the last remaining operating steel mill in Pittsburgh. It's a really interesting place. So in that 60,000 square foot farm, we have a 25,000 square feet from a footprint standpoint of biodome space, and then that translates to 126,000 square feet of growing space. So that's all of the arable space, if you will, of all of our stacked methodology, or all of our stacked systems. So that's due to the level of density that we can get from some of the automation that we have built into the biodome. So that's the size of the facility. The initial we didn't enter this space from a grow science standpoint. We actually entered this space from an automation standpoint. So many of us have Carnegie Mellon roots. We were not a spin out from Carnegie Mellon, but we have it was kind of a dorm room project, if you will, to say, okay, how can we use robotics to automate a growing system, and that started out as around the size of this table. And then over three years, we kept saying, okay, how do we think about moving the plants around the system to get to automated workstations? And then it was really taking that methodology and expanding upon that. So we use a hydroponic system. We have fill and drain trays, and then those trays are moved around the entire growing operation via a variety of connected automation tools. Some of it is off the shelf that we've augmented with our own software and our own software-hardware integration, and some of it is stuff that we've proprietary fabricated for ourselves.
Okay. And then Sam, kind of the same question towards you, for you guys. When you looked at, the crops you're growing, or as you're building your business model, where did the HVAC lighting conversation rank in terms of importance to you guys as something to solve, as a priority?
Yeah, well, I think early on we knew that lighting and HVAC were going to be big priorities, and I think certainly they're very much related. Obviously, the efficiency of the LEDs has a direct impact on what HVAC systems you're putting in, and obviously all of that's a function of what you're growing and how quickly it's growing and transpiration rates and things like that. So it was very much top of mind. I think when we first set out, we probably underestimated, like many, what was going to be needed from an HVAC standpoint, particularly on dehumidification. Looking back to 2013, 2014, but we've obviously been growing quite a bit since then, and our next facility, which will be about 140,000 square feet of floor space, but probably the production equivalent, if you take, we'll have about 2 acres of actual growing area. That'll be the equivalent, roughly the equivalent of about 800 acres of farmland in terms of production volume. So that facility in particular, we're taking a completely different approach on the kind of the critical infrastructure side of what's needed.
And then yesterday in a panel discussion, we heard that times of the year in terms of the markets, what you can potentially get at market for your product. We heard that times of the year impacted growing decisions. How have those sorts of variables impacted AeroFrams' growing decisions or crop selections?
Yeah, I mean, our business plan is to essentially be a price taker in the market, and that's something that we're striving for. So we want to be growing at a cost structure that's competitive with the field farms in California. And in doing so, really be in a position where we can take the price that's given to us. Obviously, that's somewhat aspirational. In certain instances, we have been doing that. In other instances, it's been more of a struggle. But that is the goal, and that is, I think, the goal of this industry in general, is not just to produce with less inputs, but to produce economically with less inputs than field farming. So that kind of answers your question. I mean, we have seen some seasonal variability in terms of order volumes, things like that. But generally, since we're selling into such a large market for leafy greens in particular, that hasn't really affected us as much as it might be affecting some of the larger growers right now.
Okay. And then Djavid, a crop question for you. The majority of projects we see around the country and really around the world are focused on leafy greens and culinary herbs. Do you have any examples of other crops that are doing well in a completely lit environment?
Sure. So strawberries are kind of the next big crop that a lot of CEA growers are looking to produce in vertical farms specifically. There's a company in New Jersey called Wishi Farms that is now growing strawberries and distributing them to Michelin star restaurants in New York City. They cost about $50 a pound. They're very expensive, supposedly delicious. They are served as a plating in one of the multiple courses that you'd receive at this restaurant, and as one of the plates you get 2 of these strawberries, nothing else. So you can see the kind of markets that these products are getting into, especially on the culinary herbs and niche crop side. But we caution our clients about these markets because the size is limited, and you can oversaturate those markets pretty quickly. And there are a lot of big players in the Dutch agriculture industry that have focused on these markets and are paying more attention to it in the United States. An example of that is the New York City microgreens market, which is largely controlled by a Dutch microgreens producer that produces very cheaply in a greenhouse on Long Island. So they compete with all of the smaller microgreens producers in New York City, and it's hard to build kind of a capital raise around a market when you have, or a limited market size, when you have very big players kind of stepping into the ring with very low cost of production. And we've seen investors shy away from those niche markets for that reason.
And then this question I'm going to give to either Grant or Sam. How have your decisions, or the decisions you've made around energy purchases, right? How have your technology partners played a role in that? whether it be, I know, Grant, you guys have a microgrid partner. I know you guys are working with Dell and some other groups like that. Have you how much do you rely on those relationships with the tech partners versus how much of the stuff do you work on in-house?
Yeah, I guess, Sam, I'll maybe go first and try and keep it short. So I mean, the partnerships in this space are huge. So especially when you think about energy, it is one of our largest cost items. So when you think about the great math problem, that's how we often talk about it internally and externally. It's all about trying to make the economics work. I think Sam hit the nail on the head. We all want to be price takers in this market. That's the only way we're going to be able to really start to move the needle in terms of the product that comes out of California. So the technical knowledge of how different energy solutions can integrate within a system is just not something that we have both had the time to do, because that would take us probably, 20 years to build the perfect farm on our own. Or it's something that when we need to connect information points across, we need the expertise of external partners. So if it's something such as our microgrid, where that allows us to take our internal energy usage and how we plan for energy usage on a daily basis based on what's in the biodome, and we look at what's happening from the grid, and we try to manage and do curtailment as best as possible. Or if it's trying to even take a step back and look at, okay, having high resolution controls on our breakers, looking at high resolution data analytics on each of our panels, and trying to match that up with how our HVAC is pulling that together, and being able to bounce that off of somebody who is an external partner and say, hey, does this look right for just how I'm trying to understand what the hell is going on, pardon my language, what's going on. That's huge, because we're a very small focused team. We're trying to get the highest quality plants out, and we really do rely on external partners very heavily.
So I think certainly we rely on external partners for some things. I would say, though, at a very high level, like AeroFrams, we're our own technology partner, in that we have a technology that we've built out, obviously in conjunction with many other players, but we have a technology that we're looking to deploy across the globe. And the site selection, where you actually deploy that technology, can solve a lot of the questions. And it's for the same reason why you have farms in California. You may have farms that are located next to utilities where you get a lower cost structure, or have certain infrastructure in place. There's a reason why farms are in California, and it's because they can produce with a low cost structure, and that's a function of a lot of different factors. But now there's new technology, and that new technology is now going to be implemented across the globe, and that will be done in conjunction with site-specific factors, and I think that can go a long way at mitigating a lot of the costs. So it's a little bit of a different way to answer.
And then one final question before we open it up to the audience for questions. I'm going to put this out to all three of you, because it might be slightly sensitive information. Can any of you answer the question, what percentage of your cost of goods and material does utilities make up? So another way to ask that is, how much, on a per pound basis, what percentage is utilities? Or whatever metric you are comfortable using or sharing.
Yeah, I guess I'll take a swing at trying to answer that. It kind of depends on the crop, because not all crops take the same amount of usage. And then as you think about the everything going on in the biodome, you have a mix of crops. That's also gonna add into something else. From what we've found, it's anywhere between 30 to 50% in terms of what our cost is.
Right. Djavid, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would say it depends a lot on the system type. The crop definitely plays a role in that. But also, I mean, when we look at a greenhouse that has no supplemental lighting, your energy use can be very, very low. And then your labor will be the higher cost component. Almost across the board, we see labor as the biggest cost for these farms. Utilities does hover around 30 to 50% usually, but then that can grow if you have a highly automated farm that uses a lot of mechanization and automation instead of that labor component.
Sam, do you want to add anything, or?
I can't say.
Okay. All right. With that being said, I think we now have some time for some questions, so I'll turn it to the audience.
In an earlier panel, we talked about how the energy consumption of a farm or facility is not necessarily the greatest contributor to the carbon impact. It's often the fuel mix. And so I was just curious if you could both, or in all three of you, comment on what you've been seeing in terms of, in your own facility, the mix between electrical consumption and other, whether that's natural gas, delivered fuels, on-site thermal, renewable generators, et cetera. Yeah.
So I can't comment on the total carbon impact. We just finished the farm, and we're literally firing it up to have crops on shelves in the next 30 days. So that's something that we hope to be able to share and be open about very soon. We do have natural gas that comes into the microgrid to a standby dispatchable generator, and then we have solar on our roof as well. So you hope to offset that. How much that will actually take over time as we think about ramping up to production. We want to publish actuals once we have them.
So I think microgrids are definitely a great, and I think there's a panel on those later today, a great opportunity for the sector in certain instances, particularly where you have higher energy costs. I think there the challenge is you need something like 20 times the square footage in terms of panels of what you would need just for your consumption during peak hours of the day, and then you need all the batteries and everything else. So it's huge, and that would dramatically impact your site selection, right? So now all of a sudden you're looking for, 2 million square feet versus 100,000 square feet of space. It dramatically changes that assessment. So it's a challenge, but it's not to say that it can't be addressed. I mean, we located specifically, our next farm will be in Virginia specifically because it had a reliable grid, had reliable inputs for natural gas and for electricity, and also that we felt the utility was making efforts itself to diversify its portfolio and to move into renewables. So, it's a bit of a different approach, but certainly we want to be partnering with utilities where we have a like-minded view in terms of their carbon impact over the course of our farm's operation. So,
you guys just sort of answered it. Jim Pantaleo, Sam, Grant, Djavid, thank you. So, when we talk about either owning a building or leasing a building, it brings a whole another question in with respect to how much you can go off grid. Maybe this is a question for you, Djavid. What have you seen in terms of folks that own their buildings versus folks that lease their buildings? And the reason I ask that is that I've been a part of indoor farms where the buildings have been owned and leased. For the lease building, we wanted to put photovoltaics up on the roof. We could, totally fine with the owner, but when we left, they stayed. So it didn't really pan out. With the other building, of course, we owned it and we could have done that, but I'm just curious what you know about that. Thank you.
Sure. Well, I think a lot of it comes down to who owns the building and what they're going to allow you to do. I would say in the planning stage, it's really important to look at the zoning in that particular area, what that allows for, and if you are planning on using microgrid or other renewable energy tie-ins, that you have the space for that. So it's difficult to provide a concise answer for that, but I would say it really just comes down to doing the due diligence beforehand and making sure that you can do those things before you've invested, either through a lease or an outright purchase.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. AgriList just did a study, and obviously they do quite a bit of reports. I just wanted your comments on vertical farming, because the numbers in that particular study seem to be fairly high with regards to not being profitable in the vertical side. And I know you just mentioned something about labor as well, which I would expect with the cherry pickers and all that, trying to do vertical farming is going to be a big challenge. I'm just curious, do you have a consensus amongst you of where do you think that's going and how you may be able to make it more efficient?
Yeah, so I think every project, every farm is unique. So I think there's a lot of studies that are published in this space. Labor is often cited in them as being a large cost, but there are so many factors that go into this very complex, it's not even complicated, it's beyond that, complex math problem. I mean, what's the rent? What's the yield cycle? Are you doing one crop? Are you doing multiple crops? What is the HVAC strategy? There's all these factors that come together. So I think the vertical farming space in particular has struggled because a lot of people are still trying to approach the validation or the proven economics from a research standpoint without really looking at kind of full production assumptions. And what I mean by that is really looking at it from okay, how do you balance all of these different work in process inventory actuals and also what's happening from a marketing standpoint. So I think it's definitely here to stay as an industry. I think that there's enough need for it. I think that there's enough factors for it. Labor is a component, but it's just a component in a very, very complex problem.
I mean, I think that's all right. It is very complex, but we've been operating now, the vertical farm that I showed in the video for about 3 years. As I mentioned, that was designed about 5 years ago. When we designed that, it was to prove out certain KPIs, and we as a company have consistently hit those KPIs, and now feel confident that future build-outs will get the unit economics that we need. So, in short, obviously, this was so new when we were setting out to do it, and it's still extremely new. This industry is in its infancy. We were kind of triaging risk, and we really built the facility around, I would say, more like flexibility, because we didn't know exactly what we needed. We didn't know exactly what automation was going to be needed. We didn't know exactly what critical infrastructure was going to be needed. So we built it around flexibility so that we could hit the KPIs that we needed to hit. And having de-risked, essentially the ability to scale these vertical farms, the economies of scale in conjunction with those KPIs, we feel, confident we're going to be building a much, much larger, improved design of that, in Virginia. So I think that says something. Obviously, every technology is different. What profitability means is different to different parties. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to kind of look at it, but I think I agree. This industry is unquestionably here to stay. There's a lot of tailwinds, I think, in the industry as well to kind of keep driving. We just talked about LED efficiency and efficacy. There's a lot of improvements that are kind of coming down the pipe. So.
And I just add one more thing to that is that there are profitable vertical farms out there. But all the answers up here have touched on a couple of things. What is profit? That means a lot to different people. So what you'll see right now in food production in the vertical farming industry, oftentimes the smaller farms can turn a profit, but they're usually bootstrapped, and profit is measured maybe differently than somebody who's out doing a large capital raise and building a mega vertical farm. So I think that was a great answer. And I'd like to see if Djavid had anything else to add to that.
Sure, yeah. What we've seen a lot is entrepreneurs building their businesses in kind of a step function where they won't set out with positive unit economics. They'll understand that they're going to be operating at a negative margin for maybe a couple of years and while they build their brand and then basically take up shelf space. And then they can leverage that shelf space for investment in further rounds and provide their investors with a roadmap of how they're going to lower those unit economics and achieve profitability in the future. Sure, yeah. Everybody's going after that because it's kind of the low-hanging fruit of the industry. It's, microgreens, smaller baby greens. They have lower lighting requirements compared to other crops, so you can manage those heat loads more affordably. And there's a lot of existing standardized automation and mechanization systems that are often borrowed from the Dutch horticulture industry that are then used in this industry to reduce that labor cost. But as the market expands into other higher value crops, we see the labor become an issue again with things like strawberries, where, you know, if you're not operating on a size of farm large enough, you can't use natural pollinators. You have to hand pollinate or you know, do some other method for pollination, and that becomes very costly again. So it depends on the crop as well as the size of your operation.
Yeah, I'd add one more thing to that. At Urban Ag News, we look at 3 variables, and there's a lot of inputs that go into these 3 variables. If you think currently, if you think about light intensity, you think about plant density, and you think about crop cycle, and you look at the variables that make up those 3 those 3 measurables, you'll find profit.
Okay, we've got another question back there. Hi, I was curious if you could talk about the commissioning process, whether that you perform yourself or whether that you had a partner perform for your facilities, either when you were newly constructing in your existing building, and then Sam, if you have plans for commissioning for your new facility.
Yeah, so we built new. Everything was built from the ground up. We laid the concrete pad, everything else. So there's kind of HVAC commissioning when you think about that. There's light turn on, literally. So that's all. A lot of things. There's packaging commissioning. So some of that stuff we've worked with partners where we've bought technology off the shelf. But I mean, from a full systems integration standpoint, I mean that's really proprietary to us. And I think within this industry, it's pretty much proprietary to everybody. So it's really how you bring all of these pieces together. That's really the real challenge. So we have a full kind of commissioning turn on plan with that we are at the tail end of now. And so that was something, again, back to Chris's earlier point, that was something that we worked on with external parties. So our relationship with our utility has been fantastic. They've been really close since we went from dorm room project to visionary mega farm. We included them from day one. So that was that planning process we worked hard at probably a year and a half ago in terms of, hey, what is this actual commissioning schedule ramp up going to look like? And we've seen really big dividends of making sure that everything was really just well articulated. And we feel lucky that we actually did that piece successfully.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that the commissioning is definitely proprietary, how you kind of integrate all the systems. I will say one thing that that you should just stress with these types of systems is there's a real estate component, and then there's the kind of improvements to that real estate that need to happen, and then there's the equipment itself, and all of that is a bit of a dance. And the earlier you have access to the building to start installing equipment, the better. Because it accelerates that timeline. So I think from when we talk about like permitting and early access and those types of questions, there really isn't a playbook out there, and we've had to work directly, with the permitting offices and the relevant parties to get into the building sooner than maybe you normally would have. And I think establishing some sort of a standard there would be a good thing for the industry, because hopefully it'll be a good thing for the industry, but getting early access to get that process going is important, because obviously these are expensive to build out, and the sooner you start growing and selling food, the better.
We have time for one more question. Yeah, go ahead.
I think that's an important point, Sam, that you just made too around these. So there's a lot of activity in the cannabis realm. So when you think about permitting, when you think about commissioning from that standpoint, you do have knowledge in some utilities, certainly not all, and I think we've all been part of that conversation here today, or over the past couple days. A lot of our facilities do have very proprietary controls. So when you think about panel boards, where those are placed, how those are designed, how they're impacting certain production systems, all of that is just going to be unique to really any type of inspector. So it's for these size farms, it's something that's new, and so for a lot of utilities and a lot of inspectors, new means time. It means time to understand. It means time to become familiar. So making them aware of literally since the first time we got initial even almost napkin drawings was what we tried to do, because it's certainly a unique situation.
All right, with that, I'd like to thank the panelists and thank everybody for your attention. Yeah.